I have always believed that, when you take those big steps that seem scary towards your dream, that's when the universe steps in to help you. The universe is like, all right, finally, like you're taking some risks.
Welcome to the Passages from the Heart podcast, a podcast made by an everyday sailor for everyday sailors. We talk everything from day sailing to racing to cruising to camping out on your boat and everything in between. It's time now to raise the sails. Welcome, sailors, to another episode of the Passages from the Heart podcast. In today's episode, I talk with Owen Murphy, founder and owner of Meridian Marine Electrical. Recently, I had the pleasure of working with Owen to help me convert my Com-Pac 23 Charm's former AGM battery system to a new lithium battery system. He also helped me demystify the electrical system on board Charisma, my Com-Pac Legacy. From a very early age, Owen knew he would, one day, be sailing offshore, passage making. It took some time to realize his childhood dream, but after years of working as a school teacher, a rigger, and then finally a marine electrician, the universe smiled wide upon Owen, and he, at last, set sail towards endless horizons aboard Rumi, his 1994 Pacific Seacraft Crealock 34.
Owen, are you there?
I think it's working. I'm just starting the video.
Yeah.
There we go. Hey, wow, out in outer space.
I am in outer space. You know what? If I was born like in Star Trek times, I would totally be on the Enterprise and stuff, sailing in space.
I feel that's funny that you bring that up because I also feel like a lot of us sailors, we all just want to have spaceships, but this is as close as we can get on Earth,
Oh my gosh! You know what is so funny is that I actually was thinking about how sometimes the ocean seems so small to me now, even though I've never done any ocean sailing of passage making type stuff. But it's weird because I guess because technology makes our world smaller in so many ways. And I hear so many stories about sailors that, I don't know, running into things in the ocean, submerged objects for one thing, or other boats, almost having collisions with other vessels. I mean, even though it is so vast, I'm sure when you're out there, right?
I haven't had that experience yet, to be honest. I have seen like coastal sailing. I've seen like I think what I saw was a giant floating washing machine.
Oh my gosh.
And I was just like, it was all rusted and, floating on the surface, so I could see it pretty well. But I was only a few hundred yards off the coast. But in the ocean, I mean, when I just did the Pacific crossing, I didn't see a single thing the entire time. But I also didn't spend a lot of time, I spent a lot of time outside, but not a lot of time like you'd think, just staring off into the ocean. I spent a lot of the time actually down here because I'm not getting sunburned when I'm in here.
Yeah,
and then,
for sure.
I'm navigating or reading, and then I go up there to work on the boat or whatever. But I usually come back down here as soon as I can, just because when you're spending that much time at sea outside, it really, you're getting pretty wrecked by the sun.
Yeah, you get hammered with the sunlight and the UV and whatnot. I mean, I definitely want to get into talking about your boat and everything. But before we get into all those particulars, I need to officially welcome you to the show. So I'm just so thrilled that you were willing to come on. And, I know in our consultations for the marine electricals, I always wanted to kind of start picking your brain about other sailing things. But, I was like trying to stay on task. And I want you to know that I listened to an episode of Paul Trammell's Offshore Sailing and Cruising yesterday, and in it he was talking batteries and electrical systems on board, and he mentioned you, of course, and how you had helped him. And I was listening to this, and I'm thinking, I know what they're talking about now. I get
it. Yay, that's awesome. Yeah. So glad to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, it was like such an I was just so thrilled because I was like, I know what they're talking about now, finally, because like before it's like all gibberish to me. So I was really excited because I could, in that context, especially, for the kind of the first outing of my newfound knowledge with working with you, I was like, yeah, okay, I got it now.
That's awesome, though. I'm so glad that you're already starting to feel more confident with understanding electrical. Because it's such a huge part of your boat and how it works
Oh
and how
yeah.
to enjoy cruising. When you have all that background figured out.
Yeah, totally. I had a consultation. Another guy that was on Paul's show recently who has sailed around the world nonstop solo, Jerome Rand of Sailing into Oblivion.
Okay.
He was on, like, I think maybe a month or so ago, maybe on Paul's Offshore Sailing and Cruising. But
Yeah.
I've been working with him a few times on some consultations. And, I was talking to him about you and I meeting up and doing the remote consultations with the marine electrical systems, specifically for my boat, and learning more about what I have and where I want to go. Because, these are all things that before all I was thinking is, I don't want to deal with this, so no battery. Okay. No cabin lights, no anchor light, no, running lights. I just won't sail at night. Okay. But then I just realized that my line of thinking, having fear prevent me from understanding my boat is a travesty. I don't know how to say it, but like kind of what I said to Jerome yesterday was, people often say, and I think maybe I told you this, that knowledge is power. But I'm not a competitive person and I'm not a power hungry person. So to me, that doesn't really fly. But what flies for me is more so knowledge is empowering, because when you understand your boat and its systems, it gives you the ability to really enjoy your boat. You know what I mean? Like, maybe I want to go out for that midnight sail, so I need to use the running lights. Maybe I want to anchor out at night in a cove. Well, then I'm going to need to use my anchor light. There's all sorts of things that I could allow, or just by being fearful of understanding my systems on board, that prevent me from fully enjoying what my boat is capable of doing. So that's that's like what I feel like when I work with you, is that you've given me the confidence. I'm not going to get overly confident, don't get me wrong, but like, I have a plan. I understand what it is that I'm going to do now moving forward. And then I know what we're going to do to build upon that in the future, like adding solar, or like if I do end up going to the dock that has shore power, that we can put that new receptacle in. So yeah, I just think as a boat owner, again, these are all things that, and I know I'm not alone, because I've heard other people talk about this sort of thing where, it can be overwhelming. And so because of that, they just kind of don't use the boat in that capacity, which is really, in a way, you're really limiting yourself a whole lot by doing that.
Yeah, completely. I agree completely. I remember when I was the same way, until I started teaching shop class when I was in Colorado. I had no electrical background. Then when I was 26, and I was in the exact same boat. I was like, I'm just gonna leave that to everyone else. But I always knew that eventually, when I went on to go sailing, that this is the career I would choose, and I'd have to figure out how to learn it all. And it was, I think it's kind of like learning a language, when if you go to France and you don't speak French, and then one day if you can, it's like you unlock there's a whole world there that is fascinating. And for me, when I finally could open up the back of a panel, a massive panel on a 100-foot boat, and I could just look at it and just found it interesting instead of finding it like just blowing my mind. It was so cool. It's like, oh yeah, well, this goes there, that it just, and everything became so fun at that point.
Yeah, and that's kind of that's what I felt like too when I was working with you, is that I was really enjoying, because what it is that I'm learning about how to use my boat more, and I want to be on my boat. And so the more that I understand about my boat, it's fulfilling that dream of mine, which is to be a sailor and to, and I will say also, to be, like Lynn and Larry Party say in their boat, the self-sufficient sailor to some extent, and kind of like just also getting similar line of thinking with what you remember when I asked you too, like, oh, well, so is it like there's codes for marine electrical as well, like how there are for houses? And then you gave me that example about, oh, well, let's say you're a single or solo sailor and you're in the middle of the Pacific and you have an electrical issue. It's not like you can just pick up the phone and find,
Yeah.
Joe marine electrical and technician to come out and help you. You got to do it yourself. So,
Yeah.
it's like I said, I think that having that ability to understand these kinds of systems on our boat, and some of the systems can be very complex. Like, like mine, I know is so simple, like you were saying, but that's a good place for me to start. And when I feel like I have the confidence with that, when I look to get my next boat, which I'm already kind of looking to do that, I won't like say, oh, I don't want that boat because I looked at the panel on it. I'm like, that frightens me. Now I'll be like, oh, I'll know what to do. And of course I can always work with you to help me figure it out too, if I don't understand.
The more I can help with that, the better. I mean, the more I can get you to the point where you can do it on your own, the better. That's my goal. A lot of my clients. And I think part of that comes from, because I was a teacher for 8 years, whenever I'm doing electrical with people, I really enjoy helping people get, caught up to understand more, because I don't know. I always think, even when I was teaching in the classroom, I always put myself in their shoes, and I'm like, oh yeah, I know this. But if they did, it would just feel so, they would go leaps and bounds. They would just feel, a tremendous improvement or self-confidence if they could just get to this point. And so I always try to and that's basically me just putting myself in their shoes and just saying, well, and I can remember what it's like to not know. And it helps to break it down in that way, I guess, when I'm teaching it,
For sure. I totally relate to that as a teacher too. I know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned when you were talking about being able to go out, and when you're out in the middle of the ocean, stuff breaks and you have to fix it. That's actually how I figured out how to be that I wanted to do this as a career, because when I was not, I must have been 20 or 19 or 20 years old. I had the summer off. I just finished my junior year in college, and I was going to go to Catalina Island to teach sailing. And but I had like 2 months between, where I was just not doing anything. So I got online and I found a boat, where I could just join a crew of people that were going to sail across the Gulf of Mexico. And I was going to go with them all the way through the Panama Canal until disaster struck. This guy had just bought this 36-foot Columbia cutter rig sailboat, and he had some sailing experience, and he hired another crew who had no experience, and then me, and I wasn't hired. We were just all there as for the adventure. There was no payment, and we made it 3 days motoring because there was no wind for the first 3 days, and then the wind picked up straight on the bow, and we were going to have to tack upwind all the way across the Gulf of Mexico, which was, I mean, as a 20-year-old kid, you're like, adventure, this is going to be great. And so we turned off the motor, and then we sailed for a couple days, I think, and then the wind died again. And when we went to turn on the engine, it wouldn't start. And the batteries were dead, completely dead in the boat. And no one on the boat, including myself at the time, had any electrical knowledge. The owner of the boat, zero. I mean, and the trip across the Gulf of Mexico, which normally should take someone like, I don't know, probably like 4 or 5 days. It took us 8 days, and we did that entire trip. We did 5 of those days without any power on the boat at all. We were navigating. The only thing we still had to navigate with was a GPS that only gave you coordinates, and we were plotting them on the map as we were going, which was awesome, really. But I couldn't believe that no one on the boat knew how to do anything. We were all like, I don't know, it's not turning on, so it's broken.
Oh my gosh.
Now, if I was on the boat, I would have been going through every terminal, I would have figured out what's going on. I mean, in the end, what ended up being the problem I've determined was the alternator got burned up because he had a big battery bank and he just had a standard alternator, and an alternator can't run a standard alternator can't run for more than 10 minutes before getting burned up. And so,
Oh, yeah. I remember we talked a little bit about that. Uh-huh.
a lot of people don't know that little thing. And anyway, his alternator was cooked, and we had solar panels on the boat, but he didn't know why they weren't working. We didn't know what an MPPT was or how solar got into the batteries. There's so many things we could have done. And it's so funny. When we got to Mexico, eventually we got to a little town, a little fishing village, and then we worked our way up to Isla Mujeres. And there it was so hard to find a marine electrician, and on top of that, all the other people on the dock had electrical problems. There was like a whole everyone was walking around asking, does anyone know anything about this or that? And that's when I figured out. I was like, when I get a boat and I decide to go sailing, I'm going to become a marine electrician. I'm going to rewire the whole boat before I go. I'm going to know every single thing in the boat, because I don't want this to be a problem for me, but also it's obvious that there's plenty of work out here for it, and there has been since I've taken off. Work has been amazing,
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I was just thinking as you were recalling that story, I mean, my gosh, what would have happened if, let's say, I don't know, you had stormy conditions and you were taking on water and your electrical bilge pump was, I mean, you didn't have, I mean, you can always use the manual one too, I guess. But I mean, yeah, to have no power like that could be, and I think I remember a story too, of another sailor, Olivia Wyatt. I think I told you about her. She's Wilderness of Waves, and she's doing the GGR with her Tushing Panda 34.
Yeah.
And when she left San Diego to sail to Hawaii, she had some sort of problem with her engine, which then led her being unable to charge the batteries, which then led her having no navigation lights. So it's interesting, like how one problem can lead to another problem, which leads to another problem. So that's why I think, like what I was saying about being like self-sufficient to an extent, at least, so that if you do, I mean, and she did try to troubleshoot all of that, and I think that she eventually figured it out, but it was some days later, I think, before the puzzle kind of came together for her. But it's really, especially when you're doing something like being out on an ocean. Like, I think it's one thing for me to be on a little inland lake, but still, like, as a responsible boater, if I'm out at night, I should have my navigation lights on, or whatever. It's just, it's safety, right? And so people know, they see your green starboard bow light. They know which way you're going, and it's important.
Yeah, I've been in my dinghy and almost been run over by boats in Panama, Pangas, in the middle of the night. Where they had no navigation lights on. I had a headlamp, and I turned around, and there's a boat coming down on me, going like 30 miles an hour. Just like, and people do die that way. It happens actually. In Panama, there's a lot more boat related deaths than we hear about.
Yeah, no, I think I've heard Paul talk about that too, and this Paul Trammell with the offshore sailing and cruising, because he's in that area, and he was talking about a little bit of that as well. Sounds kind of a little like the Wild West in that regard, or Wild West. But
that's sort of, in a way though, it sort of makes Panama really fun, because it does feel like you're in like a Wild West, like like every man for himself kind of world. And that's fine when everything's going really well for you, but it can turn really quickly, right? So it's like,
yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you too. I mean, I know I've heard you on Paul's podcast twice, and so I know some things, I think, about your background, but I was wondering if you could kind of tell people, our listeners, what is your origin sailing story? So I seem to think that you grew up in Florida and you were surfing, and I don't really recall specifics, but how did you come to find sailing in your life?
Well, so my dad really all this is my dad's fault. He was the sailor he's a romantic he'd buy a 24-foot wooden sailboat, and then we'd have that for a year. Then he'd sell that and buy 27-foot sailboat and sell that. And then, we'd like, but eventually he had, for most of his life, he had several versions. He's obsessed with the Bristol 27. He had one when he was my age with his friend, and they sailed it all over New England together. And we had the same one again when we were kids, and him and my mom and the 4 boys, all of us, 6 people, would sail around the East Coast on a 27-foot Bristol, and with bare bones boat. I don't even think there might have been navigation lights on that boat, and that was it. And so I think that was a big part of it. I always loved the feeling of being on the boat. It's just fun. It's just like it feels like Peter Pan. Like you just feel young and free out here. And then but when I got into high school, I joined the sailing team that my school had, and I was very, very fortunate because the guys on the sailing team were very, very elite level sailors, and it was just totally a fluke. These were guys who grew up sailing with private coaches and stuff, and they happened to go to a public school. And John Modica and Parker Dwyer and David Ames was the coach, and David Ames was he won the world regatta of Opties when he was like 7 with like a broken arm, like that was his like biggest claim to fame or something. But he was a very intelligent,
wow.
He was a very intelligent sailor. And so when I started with them, I barely knew how to sail. Actually, I always loved sailing, but I didn't really know what was going on until I started racing. And then with those guys, in addition to the high school team, I started doing club sailing, which is they had their own boats, and they took me on as a crew. And they're just two-person boats, but there was probably 5 of us, 5 boats, like 10 guys all together. And we would fly all over the country or drive all over the country, really, with pulling these boats everywhere. And we would compete all up and down, all the way from Washington State up to Buffalo, New York, all over Florida, and on the East Coast, everywhere on the East Coast. And we won. I mean, I've got one national championship under my belt, and in Buffalo, New York, in the 420 sailboats. And then we went to nationals 3 times as a high school team.
Holy cow!
And
wow.
It was very fun. I mean, we were always though, like, I'm really glad it was those guys though, because our whole mentality of sailing with them was like, we're gonna win, but we're gonna make it look like we're not trying. That was like their whole, like, they always wanted, like, everything was always a joke. Like, we're gonna do it. We're all men, but we're all gonna wear thongs where the back of the thong hangs out above our bathing suit. So when we cross the finish line, we can make a joke in front of the judges, or we had a big giant pink spinnaker and everybody else had white ones. We had pirate flags sewn to the back of our life jackets, and it's just silly. We never, they were just a really goofy group of guys, and I felt very fortunate to sail with them and sail in that style. And then but that was kind of it. Once they graduated, the high school sailing team wasn't so much fun anymore, and I was also surfing a lot, and I wanted to just do that. I kind of was just like a high school senioritis kicked in, and I was like, I just want to be a surf bum. And so I stopped sailing my senior year in high school, and then but when I went to college, I took my family had an old beat up laser, those, like, it's like those little single sail sailboats.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I took that thing to college, and that was one of the most awesome things I did, because nobody in college, I went to Flagler College, and nobody had a sailboat. Wasn't anything to like show off, but it was very fun to just be like, yeah, you guys want to go, like, you want to go sail around the bay? Or, people would always want to come, and we'd go out in the inlet and surf waves on it and capsize that thing.
Where was it again that you went?
This was Flagler College in St. Augustine, Florida.
Oh, okay. Yep. Mm-hmm.
And we would even take the laser, and there's a big castle, the fort in St. Augustine. It's this colonial town, and they shoot these cannons off over the water every hour, on the, right at the top of the hour. And we would sail the laser up in front of the castle and try to time it right with the cannons. And then, all the tourists sort of lined up, and all the colonial guys there, and they're shooting their cannon. And then we would be in the bay right out front. And when they would blast it, we would purposely capsize the boat and all jump off the boat. And then you see all the tourists like, oh, very
Uh,
nice. Yeah.
that is
It's a good
hysterical.
time.
Oh my gosh. That's well, it sounds like your dinghy years are a lot better than mine. Like I'm like traumatized from dinghy sailing. I also
No.
my I it was same for me when my dad was the sailor, and he grew up sailing on the East Coast out of Marblehead, I guess. And anyway, so but we were in the Midwest, and we belonged to a little yacht club, and the kids had like their little dinghy races, and I remember we had also sailing school in the summertime at another lake that was kind of closer to the metro area because our lake was like 2 hours away from the metro area. But I remember, I think I was sailing like probably a sunfish is what I'm guessing. It wasn't a laser because we couldn't afford those. Those were more like, super stealthy dinghies. But I remember like capsizing that boat all the time in that little lake. And then one time we had a out on the big lake, we had the kids race out on the main lake. So not like in like the little, like, a kind of finger area where things were calmer, but it was out in the main lake and it was super windy. And I was sailing a squadron Molly Brown, which is basically kind of like an old school, it's more of a rowboat. And then there were the other kids that had the lasers and then the mini fish or sunfish. And I'm sailing along and like I have like the tiller. I remember I had it like all the way, I think, to my chest to try to stay on course. And then the rudder broke.
Oh no, really? Wow. You were sailing
Yeah, the
hard.
rudder broke. Yeah, it was just like a little wooden. I mean, it was only like I don't remember how long that boat was, maybe 10 feet. I don't know. But anyway, but yeah, my dinghy sailing, I always feel like traumatized from it. So I wish I kind of want to relearn on because they always say that to really learn to sail, you should start with dinghies.
Oh yeah.
And then yeah, so like if you do that, because then you really understand, I think, kind of more how the wind works. And then when you screw up, there are consequences because you capsize the boat, right? But
Yeah.
but yeah, no, your adventures sound a lot more fun than mine were.
I mean, that's a good story too, though. The rudder snapping.
Yeah.
God. I think it. I think I'm so grateful for the dinghy sailing because it really. I try to sail. Now I sail I sail this boat like a dinghy. Like it doesn't. I think when I meet people who started sailing on a big boat, they're very cautious with the boat. There's a lot of power. They don't want to sail into the anchorage. They always want to motor in everywhere. They always, I like to sail as close as I can, all the way to the dock if I can, depending on the conditions. Oh, I was just saying it's so similar to dinghy sailing.
Yeah.
I treat this boat in the same way, except that it's bigger, slower.
Yeah.
It has a lot more force in the load, in the sail, so I have to be a little bit more cautious with that kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
as far as it doesn't. I think if I were to get a really big boat, I'd probably feel a little bit more like, oh, I got to slow down and like be more safe and everything. But I think I like having a 34-foot boat for that reason, is it still feels kind of like sporty, and I can still kind of shoot around and stuff, and I can see over the bow. I'm not like
Yeah.
50 foot behind my bow.
And you are like with your boat, primarily you've always been a single or solo sailor, right? With the boat you have now?
Yeah, I mean, I had crew. Oh, I had a girlfriend when I bought the boat, and we did some sailing together in the Bahamas. And then, and then when I left Florida originally, I had my buddy Jake with me for 2 months, 2.5 months, I think, and he sailed with me all the way to Panama,
Oh
which was
wow,
really
okay.
fun. So I had a very good time with him. And then since Bocas del Toro, I've been solo nonstop, and I don't mind sailing solo. I mean, it'd be fun. It'd be nice to have. It's nice when I have friends on the boat because I can share some of the helm duties. But if you have a good autopilot, which mine is actually acting up right now, autopilot really acts as a crew. I mean, because you got to run up forward and do something, whether it's the anchor or the sail. If you can just click on the autopilot, it's basically like handing the tiller to someone else, and then you can run back, do whatever you need to do.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
the wind vane is what I use primarily right now because I had this weird issue with the wheel pilot. I don't know. I'll get into that another time.
Yeah, no, I've heard people talk about well, first of all, one of the cons of the tiller pilots is that I guess they're big energy consumers. Like don't they drain the energy quite a bit, or not really so much?
I would say it's a pretty small load. Like it's
Okay.
less than like a refrigerator or something. I think my
Uh-huh.
Autopilot only goes like two amps or something. But
Okay.
if you have no charging on your boat, then that's a concern. But with solar, I have 400 watts of solar, and I can get anywhere between 10 and 25 amps all the time during the day, and that's no big deal when it comes to running a little load like an auto.
Okay. So I'm curious too. So after you had your experience with your family growing up, and then the high school experience with the championships and all that, that sounds amazing. And then in college, did you? Because I know you had time in Colorado and that you were teaching shop. So what about those years in there? Were those just kind of years that, I mean, because there are some Lake Dillon up in the mountains, right? And then Cherry Creek Reservoir in Denver. You were in Fort Collins though, right?
Yes. So I was in Fort Collins. I did zero sailing the whole time I was in Colorado. For 6 years, I didn't get sailing. And sorry, I just realized I got totally sidetracked and missed the finish of the story. As you were talking about, I was like, oh yeah, I didn't answer the full question. I didn't do that. I'm just so you know, my brain is always like a tangent. So
it's all good.
The question, that would be great. That would be, yeah. So in Colorado, no sailing, but I decided when I was in high school, I think probably when I was with those guys, I think I was like 13. I decided this is what I want to do. I want to go sailing around. I'm gonna steal one of these. Like I was like, I could run away from home. I could get one of these 420s, which would be a horrible idea, by the way, like a tiny little sailboat. But I was like, I could take this thing and go all around the Caribbean in it. Like I know I could do it. I could make it to Cuba and go from there. Because most of the sailing in the Caribbean is, is 2 days to 5 days, but really it would have been a disaster. But I was always a little bit rebellious, and so I didn't do that, obviously. And when I moved to Colorado, I knew that at some point I'm gonna get to the sailboat life. I just don't know how I'm gonna get there from Colorado. And I moved to Colorado. I moved to Colorado because I got married. My wife at the time wanted to go to behavior therapy school at CSU in Fort Collins, and I was also getting really into rock climbing, which is a whole nother tangent.
Yeah. I remember you talking about that on Paul's show. It sounded really cool.
Yeah, so I had already been rock climbing for like 2 years, and from Florida, which is ridiculous because there's no rock climbing in Florida. There's just climbing gyms. Even though it seemed like a really backwards move, in the back of my mind, I was like, but aren't you going to go sailing? Like Colorado's the opposite of where you want to go,
Yeah.
But I was like, oh, I want to go rock climbing right now. And so we moved there and had an amazing time in Colorado. I loved it. It was really, I was working as a woodshop teacher, / they turned it into an engineering class. So then I started teaching engineering. I didn't even know what engineering was when they asked me to teach it. I had to look it up. I looked up in the school textbook. I was like, engineering, what is the engineering? Like, okay, this is what I teach now.
Wow.
And as I was doing that, I was like, gosh, as the years went on, I was like, I really like that. I wish I was an engineer. Like, I wish I had better teachers when I was a kid. I would have totally fallen in love with this, but I think because part of that isn't my teacher's fault, but also that I was too obsessed with surfing and sailing and trying to fit in and all those things that I didn't commit as much time to my education as I think I wish I had now, you know what I mean? So, but everything happens for a reason in a roundabout sort of way. So when I was working the shop class, I eventually bought I can tell you what happened is, so my wife at the time was hemp had just become legal in New York, and her family had, this is a weird spin-off, but it's all part of it. She had become her family owned a bunch of land in New York, an old farm, and hemp had just become legal to farm, and saw that as like a cash crop opportunity. Also, it was going to like save the family farm. So she was like, I'm going to spend the summers in New York. Why don't we spend the summers in New York and be farmers and grow hemp, and we'll make a bunch of money and literally be weed farmers. I mean, it looks exactly the same, just a giant hemp plant. And then we'll spend the rest of the year in Colorado. And you know what? That all sounds great. And I thought, okay, well, what if we go a step further and we'll buy a van, and I'll turn it into a conversion, a tiny home, and then we can drive that back and forth from Colorado to New York, and we can rent a home if we need to, but at least we'll like always have this house that we can drive around.
Yeah, cool.
Well, so for 2.5 months, I was a farmer with her in New York, and I put on my overalls and I was out there pulling weeds every day and watering hemp and did all the things. But unfortunately, that's where our relationship fully deteriorated. It was already kind of deteriorating, but that was where we decided to split ways. And so I had just bought the van. The van was in my name, and I paid for it, so that was all I owned. And then she had her business. I wasn't going to try to take that from her or anything like that. And but anyway, we just said goodbye, and I took the van and drove it all the way back to Colorado, as it was just a shell with like some surfboards in it, which doesn't make any. I've been dragging around surfboards all over the country and rock climbing equipment, and so I parked the van in my classroom. It was still summer. When I say in, I had these big doors that I could open up on the side of my classroom, and I could park the van like literally 3 feet from the entrance to the shop. And then I spent every day, I probably was putting in 60-hour weeks or more, out from 8 a.m. till like 8 p.m. I was just building the van. That was all I did. And I became, and that's when I really started to apply a lot of the stuff that I've been learning as a shop teacher. And I had to, in addition to all the carpentry, which was really fun, I also got really into electrical. I had to like teach myself how solar works, how to wire the whole thing. I had to become a plumber. I had to insulation. I was sewing. I was doing all these skills that I was like fully implementing. And I was also, I even before I started building the van, I said, the price of these vans is skyrocketing in Colorado. Like everybody wants one. I was like, I could build out this van and sell it and buy a sailboat, And I was like, I've never had any money. I was always paycheck to paycheck, even as a teacher, just because teachers don't make that much. And I was spending all my money on rock climbing and traveling. And so I built the van. I moved into it after like 2.5 months or 3 months of working on it. And then it took a year to finish it, but it was pretty much done the whole time I was living on it, but I was always doing, finishing some work here, finishing this, doing that, upgrading this. And in the end, it totally worked out. I mean, I put 40,000 miles on the van. I drove it all the way to the top of Alaska and back. And
oh my goodness, really? Wow.
Yeah. And I was able to, I had invested, I took a loan out for 20,000 to buy the van, because it was only like a year old, and if I was going to sell it, I wanted to get a nice one.
What kind of van was it, Owen? What type of van was it?
It's a cargo van. It was a Ram ProMaster.
Okay.
The middle length. There's 3 sizes. It was like the middle wheelbase
one. Okay. Yeah.
And then, and I have pictures of that I could share if you're interested. I could show you how the build out and
that would be cool.
And I got my students involved too, which was really fun, because everyone in the whole school knew that I was this guy building a van. The teachers, my principal and students. So I got the students helping me build it. And anywhere else in the whole world, if you live in a van as a teacher, you're probably going to get put on some kind of list,
Well, it's funny, because it always, when you hear people say that word, like living in a van, it always makes me think, I don't know how old you are, but I know you're a lot younger than me. But when I was, Chris Farley,
Yeah. I've heard it a lot.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
Um, I love him, man.
Yeah.
But he, yeah. But it was so funny. So, yeah, I mean, literally, I was nervous. I was like afraid to tell people I was going to live in a van because I was afraid that I would get some kind of negative image because I'm a teacher doing this. But it was the opposite. In Colorado, everybody was like, "Look at this guy! Look at cool, this crazy teacher's building a van." Even my principal was like, "Oh, you're in the wrong job. Like, you should be building vans." And like, this is so cool. Like, and I just couldn't believe how much approval I was getting for this ridiculous.
Well, it's a good, so that's what kids need to see, I think, when they're in school, right? Like, okay, so you're learning these skills in school, and then look, this is how we can apply them in real life.
Yeah, I had kids literally going home and telling their parents, "When I grow up, I'm going to build a van and live in it, just like Mr. Murphy." I was like, "Don't go home and say that, right?" It's so funny. But it's true. It worked out. I had put 20,000 into the van to buy it. I put another 10,000 building it out, maybe 12, 13. I don't know, maybe a little more. But then I sold the van for $80,000 to the first person who walked into it.
OMG.
They looked at it and they were like, "Yep, we'll pay it." And I was like, "Really?"
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. That's
Maybe I should
amazingly cool. I mean,
it's crazy. So I was like, as soon as it was sold, I was like, "That's it. I'm moving to Florida. I'm buying a sailboat. I'm going to find a marine electrician. I'm going to work for him." And then as soon as I sold it, 2 weeks later, COVID happened. It's like, and it's kind of funny. It's and sad at the same time because if I had kept it another 4 months, I probably could have sold it for almost 200,000. Because in Colorado, when COVID happened, all the toys got bought up. There was no bicycles.
Everybody wanted to. Yeah, that's what happened with the boating industry too. Like, because that's when I kind of got back into sailing. Is right before that all happened, and it was the same thing. Like every time I would try to find a boat, sold just like that. I mean, like within hours, even. It was crazy.
Yeah. No, it totally makes sense. I mean, that's and I just part of me is like, man, if I had just waited a few months, I would have had more. But everything happens for a reason.
Yeah.
Because we sold the van. I sold the van. I had a new girlfriend at the time. We'd been together for about a year, and she was going to move with me to Colorado. And no, not a year. We've been together for 6 months or something. But so we're going to move from Colorado to St. Augustine, Florida, because I always had figured St. Augustine, Florida, where I went to college, was a great sailing town. It would be the perfect place to launch and start this whole adventure. And so we did that. I moved to Florida in June, and I quit teaching. Everybody was saying, "Don't quit your job. The world's falling apart. You're going to need your, and I have always believed that, when you take those big steps that seem scary towards your dream, that's when the universe steps in to help you. And the universe is like, "All right, finally, like you're taking some risks. Okay, all right, we're going to help you out now." And it's almost like
you are
stepping
so cool. You are so cool because I hear you though, what you're saying about the universe thing. That's really cool. I'm glad you brought that up because I like talking about those kinds of things, especially.
Me too. I think, yeah, there's two types of people. There's people who are like, avoid that kind of conversation, and then people like us who love to get into it. And I'm a huge believer in it. I think it's just there's way too many things that happened that got me here that people could call it coincidence, but it's like to the point where it's like comical, like, oh my god, okay, like like, universe, if you could help me with this real quick. And then like it's like the next day I'm like, okay, well, let me try that again. Oh, okay, it worked again. I'm like, okay, so this is a thing. Like,
no, it's totally. I feel the same way. It's like I can think of so many times when people would just say, "Oh, well, that's just a coincidence." I'm like, no, that's serendipity, and that's the way the universe works. If you open yourself up to that possibility, and you don't even have to be looking per se for it. It's just like you're following the inner light, if you will, that's, I don't know. I don't know how to describe it, but the older I get, it's like I feel in some ways just it calls you even more. Like, you hear it when you're a young person, but when you're a young person, it's like you feel like I have my whole life ahead of me and you're strong and you're healthy and all these things. But as you age and you start to realize like, time is really finite, not infinite, at least as far as this earthly body here is concerned. And then you realize like that those inner voices that you have of, it's just like when I moved back here, I never thought I'd ever come back to the state where I grew up. I hated it here when I grew up. But I ended up coming back, and then 5 months later, I'm getting back into sailing again. I'm like, this is for a reason, because this is something that's been missing in my life that I really didn't realize even how much I missed it until it was kind of there in my face again. Like, this is a huge part of who I am,
Yeah.
So and I felt like I had to honor those things, those parts of who we are. We have to honor that. So like, I mean, I totally hear you. It's not, I think things come into our lives because these are the things we need to do, sort of a thing.
Yeah. No, yeah, it's I mean, yeah, we could get really into it, like here, what's the point of life, all that, and it yeah, I mean, it's just been amazing because like if I hadn't moved to Colorado, I would not have become technical. Like I was not a technical person when I moved to Colorado. And the universe was like, yeah, we know you want to go sailing, but we got to get you some skills first. So then I used to be, when I was in Florida, I was teaching science. And then they were like, oh, well, I taught science and math. And the principal was like, well, science, math, that's like a good offense, a good defense. If you put those together, you're a shop teacher. And I was like, yes, sir. I'm like, I'll take it. And so,
oh my gosh.
but I'm so grateful for that. So, because, teaching is the highest form of learning. And so I got to really learn. I became really like a machinist. I learned electrical. I understand engineering theory, and then I moved to Florida. I finally, and I also, because I was out there, I got the van. I got the money to buy a sailboat. And then I moved to Florida. And when I got to Florida, I immediately got hired as a rigger. I was looking for a marine electrical job because I was still like, okay, I'm going to become a marine electrician. That's what I learned on my trip across the Gulf of Mexico. And I couldn't really find anybody. There was a guy, Polaris, but I called him and he wouldn't answer the phone. And that was the only company in town. And then I looked up a rigger, and someone connected me with a rigger, and he hired me on, and which was great as a rock climber because I was climbing masts, and I have no heights have never bothered me, and so he was really tired of climbing masts and doing all that stuff. So I was doing 200 masts a month, like just like every day, just going up and down and having a lot of fun with that. And but him and I are still really good friends, but it didn't work out because he wasn't really ready to teach me as much as he needed to teach me. And I think with my background in engineering, shop teaching engineering, he assumed I had all of the rigging knowledge and metalworking. It's a lot of metalwork, and I just needed to keep doing it, to be honest. But he didn't have the time, and so he let me go. He was like, "Man, I'm really sorry. I like you as a person, but I gotta let you go." It was like the sad breakup. But so there I'm like, dang it, I just lost my job. But as soon as I lost that job on a Friday. I called Polaris Marine Electrical on Monday, and he said, "Come on in." And he hired me 3 days later, and now is a marine electrician. So if he hadn't fired me, I wouldn't have got my dream job.
Yeah.
And and being a traveling rigger doesn't really work out as well because you have to carry rolls of cable and tons of heavy parts and stuff. There's no way I could fit that on a sailboat.
Yeah.
And so then I worked for Polaris Marine Electrical for 3 years, and after the first year, my boss retired, and one of his previous employees, Craig Devac, who's like in his 50s, he bought the company, and he was an even better teacher. He was, both of them were my mentors. Rick, my first boss, Rick Steenerson, he had been a marine electrician for 40 years. And so he had a lot of experience, but he was also kind of ready to retire. And so he was, he was a little over it. And then Craig showed up with all this energy and just loved to educate and teach. And so for 2 years, I was under his belt. And after the first year of working with him, he just sat in the office. The whole third year, I did every job. I was out in the field doing everything. And that's when, I think a lot of people think, when I tell people about what I do, especially other sailors, people are like, oh, marine electrical, I'm pretty handy with electrical. That's not that crazy of a job. And I'm like, you understand, it's like, I remember when I used to think that way too. I was like, yeah, I understand electrical or whatever, but now after doing this job for so long, what I knew then versus what I know now is so much more astronomical. And I think it's easy for people to assume that marine electricians are just doing little 12-volt circuits and things like that.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, we were doing 180-foot yachts that have 6 generators in them and autonomous systems throughout the entire boat. You can press a button in the cockpit and it locks and unlocks every drawer, like 500 drawers in the boat. Like, there's so much that goes into all that, and engineering wise and planning wire routes, and it's a very physical job. But and then so I guess after that he knew I had bought a sailboat. I bought Rumi right after the first year, right after my first boss retired, and I was keeping it at the dock 100 feet away from the office that I worked in.
Oh my gosh. Cool. Wow. Yeah.
I'd just wake up, I'd roll out of bed, I'd walk up the dock, and about 30 feet to my left was the office, and they had a work truck, and we'd just start work every day. And
that's so cool.
It was a dream setup for learning the gig. And we had a shop right there, so I could use the shop to work on my boat,
Wow. That's so cool. Like, one thing that came to mind too, as you were talking about your mentors, is one of the things I always said about myself as a teacher is like, because I used to teach a lot of technical training, software and hardware, like kind of right when computers started to become more mainstream in the household and in the classroom. And mostly I started working with school teachers, K to 12, and integrating technology into the curriculum. So at any rate, I always said to myself, because I remember some of the teachers that I worked with then, and then some of the teachers I had as a kid, it's like, it's just kind of like what you were saying earlier. It's like, you could just tell the zest, the passion for what they did was gone. And so as a kid, when you're trying to learn, or even then as an adult, when you're trying to learn, learning from someone who's not passionate about what they're doing, it's not really a great way to learn. I mean, I do think it's important that a teacher have like that passion and that energy, like to use the word that you use, that Craig, I think you said his name was, had when you started working with him. It's like, that's really important, I think. The other thing I wanted to say is, as you've been talking about your, I guess, I don't know if they call them apprenticeships, but I'm wondering, so like to become a marine electrician, I mean, I don't know if this parallels what someone who works in like homes and office buildings and like on land, a land-based electrician, I guess. For what you did, is there a school that you go to as well, or is it just all you learn on the job and you're an apprentice sort of type of situation?
So there are a couple places, I think, in the country where you can take electrical courses and you can get the ABYC certification, which is what I have. The ABY certification is a class that you have to take at the end and a test. But 99.9% of marine electricians are through apprenticeship. It's like becoming a journeyman electrician. If you're gonna, if we're doing commercial work on houses and stuff, you got to find an electrical company who will hire you, teach you, and you don't get certified until you've put in so many hours or days on the clock, working under a master. And I have, my brother is also a marine electrician. He's in Florida as well, and I was going to work for him, but he just started his own company, and he was overwhelmed, and he was like, I don't know if I'll be able to like find enough work for both of us and teach you and everything. And I was like, it's okay, man. I kind of want to be in St. Augustine anyway. He was in Stewart where I grew up, and I still don't want to be in Stewart. I don't love my hometown that much, other than the fact my family's there. And but in the end, I'll probably end up working with him eventually. We've done some jobs together now. But um, yeah, so he started out as a household electrician and then became a marine electrician because all his buddies wanted him to work on his boat, on their boats. And but anyway, really, I would say the way you could take a class, but you'd have some basic understanding, but until you're out there and you're forced to solve some really crazy problems or find some really weird issues that are going on in people's boats, and you have like neutral ground issues or corrosion or electric shock stuff, and you start to become familiar with all of there's thousands upon thousands of types of boats, and how people wire them is completely different and creative, and there's similar patterns, but there's the way people wire boats there's so much creative freedom that it's just can be a nightmare, or it can be really cool. And then with all the layers of people messing with their boats on top of that.
Yeah.
It's just, I would say I was studying how to be a marine electrician when I was in Colorado. I was like, I'm going to prepare for this. And I read Nigel Calder's book, Marine Electrical Mechanical Maintenance. I read it cover to cover thinking that would prepare me. And it probably gave me one foot in the door. It hardly gave me any knowledge. I watched every YouTube video I could find on marine electrical, and until I started doing it, until I started building panels and running wires through people's boats, and realizing, oh yeah, if I run it this way, okay, yeah, that's going to save me time, or that's going to help this person do that, or it's going to create less voltage drop. Until you're doing it all, it's not going to really. It's going to click, but you're not going to. It's not going to become second nature.
Yeah,
I was living. Yeah.
I totally agree.
For 5 days a week, I was like living and breathing, wiring boats and batteries and big and small, all things. And so, it became, I was having dreams where I just close my eyes and just see wires.
Wow. That's pretty cool. Wow. Yeah.
So I don't know. I guess the reason I get a little, passionate about this topic because a lot like the ABYC certificate, you're expected to have 2 years of experience before you get the certificate and you go for the class. And a lot of people will lie, and because they ask for your background, but it's easy to forge background, whatever. And so people will lie about it and get the ABYC certificate, and that waters down my accreditation. You know what I mean? Because that's basically the only certificate I can get to help prove what I do.
Like with credentialing, yeah. Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
When somebody who's a yacht broker, for example, I met a yacht broker who she just went and took she lied about having a marine electrical background, went through the course, and then got the certification. And I'm like, I really wish she hadn't done that. I'm happy for her, but it makes my certification, when people see that like, oh, anybody can get it or whatever, it makes my certification seem less useful,
Yeah. No, I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
It's like if they're handing out college degrees and your college degree is not worth much.
Yeah. Like you said, God bless her. She got it, whatever. But for people like you who actually put the hours and the hard work in, that really do know what they're doing, it's like there's no comparison to what you have versus what that gal has. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, first of all, I want to be really mindful of your time, Owen, because I know you do have work to do, but I have so many questions I would love to ask you. And if you have a little more time, I really was hoping to jump into how you decided, like, how did you decide upon the boat that you have? Was it your first choice? What were you looking for? And also, like, kind of what was your plan? Like, you're in St. Augustine, you're doing your apprenticeships, you get your certification, like, kind of take us from what happened at that point. Although I guess I am kind of backing up a little because I do want to learn about how you decided on the boat that you have. Because like, what were you thinking you would do, and like what kind of boat you were looking for, and all that, and then all of that to like kind of how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, of course. So I wanted to. I was searching. You know, whenever you're shopping for boats, you start learning about all the boats that are out there and everything. You know, and every single boat you get excited about. You read everything you can find. And once I saw the Pacific Seacraft, and read about it it's a blue water boat. It's a strong boat, but it's a blue water performance boat. You know, it's not a big heavy full keel boat. Full keel. Originally, I was like, oh, full keel. I want a boat that can go through a hurricane. You know, now I don't think full keels have. I think they're good, strong boats, but I don't think I think they're overbuilt for what the world, how we navigate weather and everything nowadays. I mean, if you're gonna navigate the world without weather, go get. I need it, but the way we sail nowadays is almost always based off of weather and climate movements and everything like that. So I still wanted a good, strong boat. I wanted a boat that was self-righting, where if I got flipped upside down, it would turn itself right back up. And then also because of my racing background, I knew that I wanted to sail a boat that I would enjoy sailing. Like, it's fast, it would respond well to trimming, you know, changing and adjusting sails and things like that. And when I sailed some boats like an Island Packet, for example, and that was like sailing a giant bathtub. I was like, this is a beautiful boat. It's a really strong boat. But
I almost bought one of those, actually.
If you want to sail and you want to have fun sailing, that is not a good boat, in my opinion. It's just it's too much material for and too wide and heavy for, you know, what people need. And if you want to go fast, you know, and sailboats, we never really go that fast, right? But it helps, you know, after living this way for a while, that extra 1 knot speed makes a big difference, especially when you're going lots of miles. And and it can be the difference between whether or not you're going to turn on the engine or not. You know, that's another thing. Like, if you're going 2.5 knots and you're like, this stinks, I need to get there, you're going to run the engine. But if you're going 3.5 knots or 4, you're like, this isn't so bad, I'm going to keep the engine off, you know. And so that's a big part of it. But anyway, so I liked this boat a lot for that reason, and it was kind of outside my price range. But eventually one popped up that I could just barely afford, and that's Rumi, that I have now. And I looked at some of the other boats I looked at. I really like the Caliber boats. I really like a Caliber 40 would be like my dream boat right now. That, or a Pacific Seacraft 40. But now that I'm out here, there's all these French boats that look amazing that I'm learning about. There's so many different types of boats out here.
Wow. Monohulls or catamarans?
Monohulls. They're super into aluminum boats here. I don't know if I love aluminum boats, but 50% of the boats out here are aluminum hulls. And but anyway, yeah, so I bought Rumi and I sailed her up to St. Augustine, parked her at the dock. And immediately, and the boat was in really pretty good shape. You know, after building a van, I didn't want to start from zero again. I didn't want to buy a total junker. I was like, I'm not committing that much time to fixing it up. I want to enjoy it. I'm gonna do that. But even with that said, I probably put another 25 grand into equipment, upgrades, you know, all new electronics. I redid all the rigging. I replaced all the chain plates, all the engine cables. I probably rewired 50% of the boat. You know, I redid the whole battery system, the whole distribution of power. Behind the AC and DC panel, it was just a cable nightmare, like a lot of people's boats. So I just redid all of that.
What year is your boat again?
It's 1994.
Oh, so it's not really that old. Yeah. Okay.
It's kind of like right where, in my opinion, I like boats at this age because it's a little bit after they started using vinyl ester resin in the hulls, which is a impermeable layer, you know, that they glass in. And I think that's really important because otherwise you're going to get an old boat that blisters really easily. And so I really wanted a boat like, I guess that it's just, I think it's got to be newer than 1988 for that to be a thing, I think.
Yeah, I think, that's what I recall as well.
So, so yeah, I mean, this boat, I fell in love with it immediately. I was hoping more for the 37, but when I went inside of a 37 and a 34, literally they're identical on the inside. I mean, they're space wise, you don't feel like you gain anything with a 37. And honestly, I think the layout of a 34 is better. 37 is kind of it's not really that set up for ocean cruising. It's only got a couch on one side. So I sleep on these couches when I'm cruising. The one thing that's really cool, this boat is really set up for passages, like there's a perfect bed on either side, whichever side's heeled up and crashing, it feels great. And
what is that? It's a cutter rig too, right?
Yeah, it was a sloop rig when I bought it. I converted it to cutter rig. I made the running back stays for that. I put mast steps in all the way up the mast.
Holy cow! Wow.
Anchor, new chain. I did all the new. I hired the Irish sail lady in St. Augustine to do all the canvas. Redid that.
Wow.
New dinghy, outboard. Plumbing. There's so many things that I think you're thinking about. I bought a boat that was like ready to go, and then it's just like so much equipment to upgrade. The life raft is alone like $3,000. It's just
oh my gosh,
it's so many things that just and then you still want more. You're always like, oh, I wish I could do this. Come on, look, there's no point where it just becomes done.
The bring on another 1,000, or there's some other boat acronym that I heard. I don't remember, but implying that you always can, or like boats, like sink, you're throwing your money into a hole or something. You know what? I don't know. I see why people say that, but again, it gets back to like, if it's what you're called to do, you do it.
I lost the whole thing at this point. Even though all the money I put into it and all the time and effort, I wouldn't fret. I would not be bummed, but because I know that I'm doing what I was meant to do, I feel like I'm being really true to myself. I would just say, okay, well, I guess it's over. Gotta go do the next thing.
Right. Well, I'm sure listening to your stories about how things unfold along your path and whatever that next thing would be, if that's what happens, it'll be the right thing for you.
So after I figured out the boat, bought the boat, fixed it all up, my girlfriend at the time she'd been living on the boat with me for almost 2 years or a year and a half. And I think it was 2 years. And we're like, okay, we're going sailing, and we did a mini trip to the Bahamas, and she was seasick the entire time. She hated it. She was a landlubber from, deep. And so we always kind of knew that might be the case. And so that was kind of what split us up, because in the end it was like, well, I want to continue sailing, and she doesn't. So I continued from there. And after that, and that's my buddy Jake hopped on, and we went from Florida straight to Cuba.
Wow.
People were everyone I knew was like, oh my gosh, you're going to Cuba. It's so dangerous, like, oh, you're crazy. They're a communist country. That was one of the nicest, most pleasant places I'd ever been to, as far the people there are so kind. They're so excited that you're there. They're all very friendly. I will say that the government of Cuba is completely corrupt, and everybody there refers to it as the mafia. It's not great how that country operates, but the people of Cuba are so kind, and we've never felt in danger, never felt worried about where we were at all. And more people should go to Cuba, and so that we can get rid of this crazy embargo on them, because they're suffering hardcore because of the American government not allowing them to do trade with them.
Yeah, I'm curious, what made you decide to pick Cuba over some of the other places? Because I'm guessing then, I don't know, did you jump from Cuba to Panama, or what? How did you decide instead of some of the other islands?
Two reasons, really. The Bahamas didn't impress me because it's beautiful, but nature-wise, but I felt like it was very much set up for American tourism, sailing, and like I don't want to go be a tourist. I wanted to go and be a traveler. I want to like have cultural experiences, and it felt like I was just like in Bahamas. It felt like, here's another white guy being served by brown people. Like, it just was like, this is so weird, And then And then I've got to get the vibe that the whole East Caribbean is kind of that same way, all the way down to the Virgin Islands. It's kind of the same. Like it's very, very expensive. It's all set up for wealthy sailors to show up and be served. And I was like, that's not why I became a sailor. I want to go. I want to go and like feel like I'm being tossed, like I hear in French Polynesia, where I'm like a tiny fish in a pond and I know nothing, and I have to start. I have a real experience. I have a real struggle and have to learn the language and adapt. And instead of being like waited upon as I arrive. And so that was one big reason I skipped the whole East Caribbean. The other reason is if I ever go back to Florida, which I might end up there later in life, it's extremely easy to do the Caribbean from Florida. So while I'm young, I want to go see the rest of the world, and then if I want to do the Caribbean, I can always do it again. It's I can easily buy a boat in Florida and do it later in life. It's a very safe place to cruise. It's all very well charted. As long as you avoid hurricane season, it's probably the easiest place to go sailing. It's like a big swimming pool with a bunch of islands.
Yeah, yeah.
And so yeah, that's it. And then I kind of we did Cuba, then we did the Cayman Islands, which was Cayman Islands was just like the East Caribbean. It was like the most expensive place. It's the fourth most expensive place in the world.
Oh my, wow.
Order mixed like a rum and soda was like $25 or something.
Holy moly!
Yeah, it's crazy. So then, but I had some engine issues there. I had to replace the engine mounts on my motor. So to ship those in was like $400 from Florida.
Oh, wow!
And then I got that. I did those. I had a really funny way. I had to lift my whole engine up, and I created a whole thing where I found a metal pipe laying in the street in Cayman Islands, and I laid it across the cockpit, and I winched up the whole engine on the pipe, and then dropped it back in. Had to realign it. I created I created a couple how-to videos, and that's one of the ones I did was a how to replace your engine mounts video.
Wow, I would like to see that. Yeah.
And I'll send you the link. It's
cool.
fun. I had a lot of fun making it. And then from there we went to Isla Providencia. We sailed down to it's a tiny little island that's owned by Colombia, and that was a really cool place. I mean, it's literally like giant mountains sticking out of the ocean, and we hiked around there. We went to some parties with the local people. Everyone was really kind. We sailed around a little bit. I think we only spent 5 or 6 days there, and then we went from there. Did 5 days of sailing down to Panama, or 6 days of sailing to Panama, and then we got to Bocas del Toro, and I spent Jake took off there after about a month, and then but I spent 6 months in Bocas del Toro because that was the first place I tried doing marine electrical work on the go, and very quickly got connected in the community, started having work jobs lining up everywhere. I could get equipment shipped in from Florida, and people were willing to pay for the shipping, which was cool. And so I hung out there, and when I took off, I actually didn't have that much money saved. And so that was a perfect, okay, I'm going to build up some income. And I should tell you, I'll go back here in a minute, but I missed a huge part of the Florida part. And then, but anyway, after leaving Bocas del Toro, we're having fun and getting in the community. I sailed down the coast to Escudo Veraguas, which is one of the most sacred places in the world. Paul talks about that in a couple of his podcasts. And from there, I went to the San Blas Islands, which is also,
the Escudo de, I'm sorry, I didn't pronounce that right. Is that where you had the cave experience, where you talked about the cave?
Yeah, that's where I had that crazy tribal cave. It was so nice.
Yeah. Wow, I remember that story. Yeah. That was cool.
And then from there, I went over to Portobello, which is just kind of a colonial town. I wouldn't say there's much to see or do there. And then the San Blas Islands. I hauled my boat out on my way up there too. In the Panama Marina, which is probably one of the best kept secrets in the Caribbean. You can haul your boat out in Panama Marina, and do work there for very affordable price. And it's a whole community of fun French people. There's like a French restaurant. It's in the jungle. There's, everybody. It's the most amazing experience. That boatyard. You're standing in the boatyard and you look around, and everybody is working on their boats, but everybody's working on someone else's boat. Like everyone's helping each other out. You see, like that guy's on this guy's boat, and he's on their boat, and she's on this.
Wow. This sounds like a real community experience.
Oh my gosh, we cooked a pig in the middle of the boatyard. We like had a bonfire and had a big giant cookout. In Florida, you would never be at a marina, and they're like, "Hey, we're gonna roast a pig on the ground here in the middle of the boatyard." And I just met so many wonderful humans there, and everybody would go to the little French restaurant at night and have beers and talk about life. And then I went from there to the San Blas Islands, which is another really cool thing. If I was starting again, I would probably buy my boat in Colombia, or I'd buy my boat in the Caribbean somewhere, and then I would sail it to Colombia, because this is what you can get your boat work done there for very, very cheaply. And then you can, if you're cutting your teeth sailing, like if you're a new sailor, or if you have new crew or a girlfriend or a wife that you want to get into sailing, or vice versa, if you have a husband or somebody like that, then you can come to the San Blas Islands, which is like the Bahamas, but 1,000 times better and way safer, way easier to sail, more like family oriented for kids and stuff. And it's right next to Colombia. So you could get your whole boat done, and then go to the San Blas, learn how to sail, learn how to use your boat, have an amazing adventure. And then if you wanted to go through the Panama Canal, you're right there. Or if you want to do the rest of the Caribbean, it's right there.
San Blas, those do belong to Colombia, right? They're part of the country of Colombia?
They're part of Panama still.
They're part of Panama.
Yeah, they're on the southeast corner of Panama. Yeah, on the Caribbean side.
Yeah, okay.
That
sounds amazing.
Yeah, Colombia, I think it's like Cuba. Like Americans have a lot of fear of it and all that, but they've done when you're in Panama, you meet people on a daily basis who just got back from Colombia and talk about how amazing it is and how safe it is and all of that. I think you'll still it has a bad rap because of Pablo Escobar and the narcos and all that stuff, but that's all moved on. There is still crime. It's still a third world country. But, if you've got your head on your shoulders and you're not walking around in dark alleys at night, you're probably going to be fine. It's like, I would say I haven't been there yet, but it doesn't sound any more dangerous than Panama. Panama is pretty relaxed as well. I think there's probably still some drug activity, but I don't know. I have a lot of friends who have gone to, a lot of American friends too, gone to Colombia, come back and just had the best time,
Since you made the passage from Panama out to French Polynesia,
yeah.
I mean, it sounds like we're on the start of a circumnavigation. So is that kind of maybe the goal ultimately, or?
Yeah, I'm kind of like wanting to do that, but I'm not putting any pressure on myself to do a circumnavigation. Like if I get all the way around, awesome. But at this point in the game, I'm kind of thinking I probably won't. I think I'm probably going to end up in New Zealand or Australia and settle there. I've always kind of been attracted to those countries, and
me too.
I thought maybe as soon as I got here, I was like, I'm going to live here in French Polynesia. This is awesome. But the language barrier is I'm learning is a little bit more complicated than I thought. I'm trying to learn French, but it's not as easy as I thought it was going to be. Like my Spanish was getting really good in Panama, and then I got up here and I had zero French, and I was like, that's okay. I'll just hit the ground with my feet running and learn French. It's just it's so different from the it's really like the pronunciation it's like a whole different way of using your mouth.
How long did it take you to get from Panama to, well, you landed in what, Marquesas, Nukuhiva? I can't remember.
Yeah, Nukuhiva. Well, I landed in Hiva Oa, and then I sailed from Hiva Oa to Nukuhiva, both part of the Marquesas. But I did from Panama to the Galapagos was 8 days. I wasn't actually going to stop on the Galapagos. I was going to just pass it, but there was no wind for like 3 days. I was just bobbing around in front of the Galapagos, and I was like, this is stupid. I'm going to go to the Galapagos. I just turned on my engine, and I was like, I'm going. And so when I turned on my engine, I drove in there, and I didn't do all the proper visas, and there's all this application stuff you have to do the Galapagos. You have to have your whole boat fumigated. They were like, okay, I said it's an I looked it up. You can do an emergency stop, and it was very expensive, but I spent 6 days there, and because I did an emergency stop, I wasn't allowed to use my boat to go anywhere else. I wasn't allowed to go except for San Cristobal where I was, which was really cool. And then you can't use your dinghy anywhere because you can't anchor your dinghy. You're not allowed to drop anchor with your dinghy. And in addition to that, if you bring your dinghy to the dock, you'll come back and there'll be like 6 giant sea lions lying on top of it, and they'll pop it and rip it to shreds. And so I very quickly was kind of like, well, what am I allowed to do here? Like I can't do anything. And then the only thing you can do in the Galapagos, everything you want to do, you have to pay tourist services. You can't just like go and do anything. You have to pay for someone every single time. So, it's cool how well protected it is there, but it's really not set up for like showing up and living on a sailboat, like where you're trying to be doing it on the cheap. And but I just surfed. Surfing was almost free, so I had to pay a boat taxi guy $15 to take me there and back, but I would go surfing every day.
Wow, that sounds really cool. Yeah, no, I've heard the stories about how challenging it is with the expenses, and then also because they're really concerned about not contaminating the area with what people are bringing in on their boats, sort of thing. So yeah. Wow.
Yeah, and I respect that. I think that's cool. It just was like, in my own grumpy way, it was like, come on, I want to go do some
yeah.
porn.
Yeah, totally.
But after the Galapagos, it took me 30 days to get from the Galapagos to the Marquesas.
Wow, really?
Yeah. And it would have.
Did you hit the doldrums or something?
No, but you know what it was is when I pulled into the Galapagos, I had a little bit of growth on the bottom of my boat, like just some barnacles that were like not a big deal. And I was like, that's fine. I'll just wait till I get to Marquesas to clean the bottom of my boat. Well, after I left the Galapagos, like a week into it, it turned into like a full coral reef under my boat. It was just like these big, long goosehead barnacles, the same ones that they had issues with in Golden Globe races. And it was slowing me down. Like I could really feel how slow I was going. And unless it was blowing 16 knots or more, I was hardly moving. I was doing like 2 or 3 knots.
Wow.
But even with the gooseneck barnacles, when it would get up to like 25 knots, I'd be doing 8 to 9 knots surfing down waves.
Wow. That's pretty impressive.
The spinnaker is really, the spinnaker is a serious weapon. You just put that thing up and you're just like, you just fly across the ocean.
Is yours asymmetrical or was it symmetrical?
It's symmetrical with the boom.
With
the spinnaker pole.
Spinnaker pole, okay.
I broke the spinnaker pole on the way. I also had to climb the mast 3 separate times.
Oh my gosh, I cannot even imagine. That would just be, oh wow.
I wasn't that so worried about climbing the mast as much as worried about and the first 2 times it happened, it wasn't a big deal. Like spinnaker was fine. I just had to rerun the halyard. But the third time I had to go up and get when the kite got all wrapped around the top of the mast at midnight. And in order to untangle it, I had to go up there. I had to literally climb inside of it. It was like this giant web figurated thing all around the rigging of the mast. And I have a headlamp on and the boat's just swinging around. It's like, it was so scary. Oh
my gosh. Did you tell somebody before you did that, did you send a message to someone, I'm going up the mast that way? And then, I don't know if that's I don't know if you had Starlink at that point in time or not, but
no, I didn't have Starlink across the ocean, but I did have my Garmin InReach. I use one of these things. To text people.
Yeah.
On it.
Yeah.
But I didn't send any message or anything. I wasn't really worried about getting hurt. I was just, until I got up there, and then I was like, oh, maybe I should be a little bit more careful. But
yeah,
I was just like, I don't know if I physically have the strength to untangle this thing because it was blowing 15 knots, and
oh my gosh,
it's like a 40 by 20 foot kite. That thing has it's open and running, it's got probably 3,000 pounds of force in it, And so
Yeah.
imagine, even when it's just like all tangled up and blowing in the wind, it's so much effort to bring that thing
Oh,
in.
yeah. Yeah.
And then try to bring it around something, and then it's like trying, as I'm bringing it around, it's like trying to inflate. It's like,
Oh,
and it's like and like,
I shouldn't be laughing because I mean, I guess what it is that I can just completely, I know what you're talking about. I can visualize that all too well. And it would be frightening. I don't know if something, I don't know. That's just.
And in the middle of that, in the middle of like this thing, like tangling and inflating, all of a sudden the boat goes up and down. All of a sudden the boat is like full swing, like 6 feet. So now I'm flying off the mast. I'm swinging off the mast, and I'm like, oh my gosh! I'm like trying to grab on everything.
Oh my gosh, Owen, that's crazy. Oh my god, it's like you could be a trapeze artist at this point in time. Holy moly!
It probably took me 25 minutes before I got the first wrap undone, and then because I was like, I don't know if I can do this. I was like, this is so
what
beyond.
What other choice would you have had though? I mean, would you just have to cut the lines?
I strapped my dive knife to me, and I was going to take the knife out, and if I got really desperate, I was going to just slice up the whole kite and get it out of the area.
Yeah.
But I really needed the kite. I really needed the kite to maintain my speed. It was so dependent on it.
Yeah.
And so it was like, but I remember I couldn't do it for 20 minutes. I looked up at the sky, and I was like, really? Come on, man! Like, can you help me out a little?
Yeah. So was it just, it was windy, but it wasn't like storming though, right? It wasn't like rain and lightning.
No, it was just blowing, and there was probably 6-foot swell.
Oh wow!
Regular.
Is that the
days,
incident where you were saying that you might have just given up on sailing altogether? Was that the incident that happened that made you think that?
No, you know what? That wasn't it. But that one was really awful.
There's something worse.
Yeah.
Oh
man. But man, yeah, I got that down. I got it. I put the kite back up the next day. The truth is, though, I got it completely figured out. In the end, I'm a freaking master level spinnaker flyer now because I've done everything wrong you could possibly do.
Sweet. Yeah.
I can drop it and put it back up now. Like it's, I know what I need to do. I know how to prevent this kind of accidents again. But I learned by doing so, and I probably would have been nice to be doing it with a professional the first time, but I learned by doing it.
Yeah, and you definitely learn really well the hard way, right? Like nothing like when you have something that's really
trauma.
Yeah, like learning by humiliation, learning by trauma. These are all things that really tend to stay with us. So yeah. Well, I'm wondering if later down the road, when you can carve or slice out some more time, if we can kind of continue the conversation. Because as I said, I always find that there's so many things that I want to ask you, and but the time just flies by.
Yeah, it's been really fun. It's been a lot of fun.
I learn so much from people like you, but more importantly, Owen, you're just a really cool guy. Now that I've had the chance to work with you on, as a consultant with my electrical needs for my boat, it's just I've really enjoyed getting to know you, and it's really fun to hear about your stories and adventures. So I would really love to continue the conversation.
Absolutely, love to have that happen again down the road, and I'll probably have more stories too. So.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I wanted to have people know how to reach you.
You have my website, I think, already, but I'll text you my Instagram account. I have two. I have one that's for me, and then I have another one that's for my business. I'll just give you those two if you want. So, yeah, thank you so much.
And thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode featuring Owen Murphy of Meridian Marine Electrical. If you are looking for advice or assistance with your marine electrical needs, be sure to reach out to Owen for his expertise and guidance. Check out the video description for links on how to reach Owen, as well as follow his journey as he sails the vast and open seas aboard his Pacific Seacraft Crealock 34, Rumi. If you are enjoying my new podcast series, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel, as well as rafting up with me on my website at passagesfromtheheart.wordpress.com. Until next time, fair winds.